Before we dive in, viewer discretion is advised. This content is for entertainment purposes.
What happens when you take a man who views politeness as a form of dishonesty and drop him into the epicenter of American daytime television, a place where feelings are currency and outrage is the primary language? What happens when you try to ambush a comedian who has spent 2 decades turning awkward silences into weapons of mass destruction? You are about to witness not just an interview, but a forensic dissection of the modern celebrity confrontation. This is the story of how Ricky Gervais walked into the lion's den of times. The View asterisk locked the door from the inside and proceeded to explain to the lions exactly why their teeth were fake. In the pantheon of Hollywood disruptors, Gervais stands alone. He is not merely a comedian. He is a glitch in the matrix of celebrity culture. While others walk the red carpet desperate for approval, terrified of the wrong camera angle or the misinterpreted quote, Gervais walks it, holding a pint of beer, treating the industry's most sacred rituals with the disdain of a bored schoolboy. We saw it at the Golden Globes, where he stood before the most powerful people in entertainment and told them to their faces that their awards were meaningless. He is a man who understands a fundamental truth that most publicists spend millions trying to hide. If you don't care about the consequences, you are untouchable. But the producers of Times, the View Times in 2018, didn't seem to understand who they were dealing with. They thought they were booking a guest. They thought they were bringing on a controversial figure who could be scolded, educated, and ultimately redeemed by the panel's moral superiority. They prepared their questions. They sharpened their accusations. They reviewed the tapes of his problematic jokes. Little did they know, they weren't preparing an interrogation. They were preparing a suicide note for their own credibility. Because explaining irony to the guardians of daytime TV isn't just difficult. As Ricky himself would later describe it, it is like teaching a goldfish algebra. They nod, they blink, and then they say something even dumber. The date was set. The studio lights were adjusted to that flattering, soft focus glow that is meant to make guests feel safe, warm, and compliant. The audience, a sea of eager faces, buzzed with the anticipation of a celebrity sighting, unaware that they were about to become witnesses to a crime scene. Ricky Gervais entered the stage with the casual, slightly disheveled energy of a man who had just wandered in from a pub. He smiled. He waved. He accepted the applause with a graciousness that belied the chaos he was carrying in his back pocket. The opening exchange was a masterclass in false peace. The hosts, led by the indomitable Joy Behar, welcomed him with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. They started with the requisite praise. The spoonful of sugar before the medicine. When you go on the Golden Globes, one host noted, her voice dripping with a practiced admiration, a lot of time you are politically incorrect and hilarious. Of course, it was a trap, and Ricky saw it instantly. The phrase, politically incorrect, wasn't a compliment. It was a categorization. It was a box they were trying to put him in. A lesser guest would have demurred, perhaps offered a humble, I try my best. But Ricky simply nodded, his eyes gleaming with amusement. So, thank you, he said, cutting through the preamble. So, this is, well, yes, the classic "you're politically incorrect" setup. He called out the format of the show within the first 30 seconds. He acknowledged the setup. He knew exactly what game they were playing, because he had played it and won it against opponents far more formidable than this. The air in the studio was deceptively light. But those who had followed Ricky's career knew the warning signs. They knew that Ricky Gervais does not handle compliments the way normal celebrities do. To Ricky, a compliment is often just a dull opening to a sharp conversation. Consider the tragedy of Jimmy Fallon. The king of nice, the man who laughs at everything, once tried this same strategy. He sat Ricky down on Times, the Tonight Show Times, and tried to kill him with kindness. Oh, thank you. By the way, I look great, Ricky had said, preempting the compliment. Yeah. Is that sarcasm? Jimmy asked, innocent and unprepared. When Jimmy tried to genuinely compliment him, oh, you look great, Ricky didn't say thank you. He treated the compliment like a personal insult. He dismantled the very premise of his own appearance. Even though look at me. Of course I don't look great. Ricky had fired back, leaning into the discomfort. Look, I'm worse than last time. Last time we talked about getting old and losing my hair and distended testicles. The audience on Times, the Tonight Show Times, had gasped, then roared. Jimmy Fallon, the host who thrives on positive vibes, was suddenly forced to discuss distended testicles on national television. But Ricky wasn't done. When Jimmy tried to offer him an out, suggesting his weight gain was just big bones, Ricky annihilated the excuse with a brutal, visceral image. Yeah, big bones covered in meat and gravy. That's what gets people fat. He refused the comfort. He refused the polite fiction. And that was the man sitting on the stage of Times, The View *. Joy Behar and her co-hosts were trying to execute a classic setup, unaware that their guest was a man who describes his own body as meat and gravy just to ruin a host's flow. He was unusually quiet, waiting, watching the trap being assembled in real time. Then, the shift happened. It was subtle at first, a slight change in the studio's atmospheric pressure. The pleasantries about the Golden Globes evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard steel of the agenda. The hosts pivoted. They stopped smiling. Really around since the Golden Globes, you've kept a low profile, one remarked, casting a shadow over his recent absence. It was an accusation masquerading as an observation. Asterisk. You've been hiding because you went too far. Asterisk. They pressed the button. Well, they attacked you, but they said that you were mean and rude, and you were surprised at that. There it was. The gotcha. The attempt to frame him as a bully who had been chastened by public opinion. They wanted him to admit hurt, to admit regret, but Ricky just looked at them, his expression unreadable. Joy Behar, sensing blood in the water, decided to strike with the specific evidence they had prepared. She brought up the Times, Sex and the City 2 times poster. For the audience at home, this was the smoking gun. Ricky had mocked the beloved franchise. Referring to Times, Sex and the City 2 *, she began, reading the charges. You said, I was sure the Golden Globe would go to the team that airbrushed that poster. The line hung in the air. A classic roast joke. Sharp, observant, undeniable. But on Times, The View *, jokes aren't just jokes. They are moral failings. Yeah, a little sexist, the host declared, slapping the label on him like a scarlet letter. The audience held its breath. The camera zoomed in on Ricky's face. This is the moment where the PR consultant screams internally. This is the moment where the celebrity backpedals. Asterisk, I didn't mean it that way. I respect women. I love the cast. Asterisk, but Ricky Gervais does not backpedal. He charges. No, it's not. He shot back, his voice calm but instantly firm. Why is it sexist? He didn't defend the joke. He demanded they defend the accusation. The temperature in the room plummeted. The hosts were suddenly on the back foot, scrambling to justify their outrage. Well, because the girl. You're saying that the girls are older, and they need to be airbrushed. Joy stammered, trying to articulate the offense. Ricky didn't let the sentence finish before he dismantled it. No. I think they look great at their age, he said, flipping the script entirely. He looked at the panel with a mixture of confusion and pity. I don't think that you lose your sensuality or your beauty because you hit 53. It was a brilliant counterstroke. By accusing him of ageism and sexism, they had inadvertently revealed their own insecurities. He had turned the mirror back on them. Asterisk. You Times think they need airbrushing. Asterisk. I Times think they look great. But the antagonists were relentless. Emboldened by his refusal to submit, they reached for a bigger weapon. If they couldn't get him on the poster, they would get him on his hiring practices. They shifted the battlefield to his HBO special. Asterisk. Talking funny asterisk. We just saw a clip from it, right? So, we got Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock, Louis C.K. The host listed, setting the trap. No women comedians on that panel. The implication was clear. Asterisk. You excluded women. Asterisk. Who would you replace? They demanded. It was a loaded question, designed to force him to either insult a legend or admit a bias. No. Who? Ricky fired back, refusing to accept the premise. 'Cause it was 4 people. Just 4 people, he explained, stripping away the conspiratorial tone they were trying to build. When they pressed him again. So, who would you take off? He delivered a truth so simple it shattered their narrative. I wouldn't. I would just add, he said initially, playing nice, before dropping the reality. No, They're my friends. And I chose my friends. He wasn't curating a diversity panel for the United Nations. He was talking to his friends. But the hosts couldn't accept this. They needed a victim. They needed a villain. Men are intimidated by funny women. So we didn't want them in the room. The host sneered, projecting a motive onto him that didn't exist. That's a joke, Ricky said, his patience thinning. Watch out for you seriously. He was beginning to realize that he wasn't speaking to peers. He was speaking to prosecutors who had already written the verdict. But what they failed to realize was that Ricky Gervais had been trained in the fire of far more intense interrogations. They were trying to shame a man who had been grilled by the best and had walked away laughing. Remember Ellen DeGeneres? The queen of daytime TV? The master of making guests feel awkward? She had tried to shame him for his drinking habits, a sensitive topic for any public figure. You're drinking most of the night, Ellen had accused, eyeing the beverage in his hand. Yeah, Ricky had replied, devoid of guilt. If I didn't drink, I wouldn't be brave enough to say some of the things I'm going to say. When Ellen pressed harder, asking, So, at what hour do you start drinking before the show? Trying to paint him as a problem drinker, Ricky didn't fold. He didn't apologize. So, I probably have a little one, he admitted with a shrug, turning the shame into a punchline. He had an answer for everything, and he was not ashamed. That was the armor he wore now on Time's The View, asterisk. The hosts were throwing their sexist darts and their exclusionary arrows, but they were bouncing off a man who drank beer on the Golden Globe stage to give himself the courage to insult the room. He wasn't trapped with them. They were trapped with him. And he was about to explain to them, in excruciating detail, why their entire concept of offense was a logical fallacy. The calm setup was over. The trigger had been pulled. Now, the war would escalate. The studio air, previously merely tense, now crackled with the volatile electricity of a thunderstorm refusing to break. The hosts of Times, The View Times, had fired their best shots. Accusations of sexism, exclusion, and mean-spiritedness, and watched in horror as Ricky Gervais simply caught the bullets in his teeth and spit them back out. But the antagonists were not ready to surrender. They regrouped, desperate to regain the moral high ground. If they couldn't pin him on specific facts, they would pin him on feelings. They would drag him into the murky waters of emotional validation, a place where logic usually goes to drown. Men are intimidated by funny women, one host declared, her voice laced with the certainty of a dogma that had never been challenged in her own echo chamber. So we didn't want them in the room. It was a bait so obvious it was almost insulting. They wanted him to deny it, to become defensive, to say, not all men, or I love funny women. But Ricky didn't offer the expected platitude. He offered a reality check. That's a joke, he said, his face deadpan. Watch out for you seriously, he warned. A playful but sharp admonition that they were taking comedy far too literally. The conversation had crossed the Rubicon. It was no longer about a movie poster or an HBO special. It was about the fundamental nature of discourse itself. The hosts were arguing that offense was a metric of truth, that if someone felt bad, then Ricky must have done something wrong. Ricky was about to introduce them to a concept that was alien to the daytime TV ecosystem. Objective reality. Well, that's the thing about offense, isn't it? Ricky began, his voice taking on the cadence of a professor, lecturing a particularly slow class. When people say they're offended, it's that, just 'cause you're offended, it doesn't mean you're right. The audience shifted in their seats. This was heresy. In the modern media landscape, the offended party is always the protagonist, always the victim, always right. Ricky was flipping the board. You know, offense is about feelings, and feelings are personal, he continued, dismantling their entire worldview sentence by sentence. Some people are offended by equality. So what? The rhetorical question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Asterisk. So what? Asterisk. It was the ultimate dismissal of their power. By tying offense to equality, he had trapped them. If they argued that offense was always valid, they had to validate the feelings of bigots. If they argued it wasn't, they had to admit Ricky might be right. They were cornered. And when interviewers are cornered by Ricky Gervais, the result is never a graceful exit. It is usually a descent into absolute chaos. Those who have studied the tapes of Gervais's career recognize this phase of the battle. It is the chaos principle. When a host tries to constrain him with rigid rules or moral posturing, Ricky doesn't just break the rules, he breaks the show. We saw this anarchy in its purest form when he sat down with Russell Brand. The poor interviewer assigned to wrangle them didn't stand a chance. It wasn't an interview. It was a hostage situation. I haven't seen a worse interviewer, Ricky had announced gleefully in the middle of that segment, as the host stammered and forgot which camera to look at. It's a shambles, Ricky had laughed, watching the professional structure of the show crumble around him, when that interviewer tried to regain control by pivoting to a serious topic, climate change. Is it something you think seriously about? Ricky didn't pivot with him. He mocked the very attempt at seriousness. I'm not even here tonight. He is. This is live. This is pre-recorded. Right? Ricky had taunted, confusing the timeline, confusing the host, and confusing the audience. He proved that if you don't respect the authority of the chair, the person sitting in it becomes irrelevant. This was the danger facing the women of Times, the View asterisk. They were losing their authority. They were becoming the chimney sweep. The chimney sweep incident, a legendary moment of dominance over Conan O'Brien, flashed through the minds of comedy historians watching this unfold. Conan is a giant, a man who towers over his guests both physically and intellectually. Yet, when Ricky visited Conan's new studio, he didn't marvel at the set. He dismantled it. Giant moon. Big fake moon behind you, Ricky had observed, reducing the expensive set design to a prop. He mocked the channel placement, complaining about having to scroll through the costume jewelry and eyebrow-plucking channel just to find Conan. But the true power move came when he reduced the host of Times, the Tonight Show Times, to a Victorian servant. I could come out at some point and just bring you all tea, and then you could dismiss me. Run along, Ricky had proposed, flipping the roles. Out you go. Out you go, you chimney sweep, he had commanded, employing a mock English accent. And Conan O'Brien, one of the sharpest minds in comedy, had no choice but to play along. Thank you, Dick man, Conan had laughed, accepting his defeat. If Conan O'Brien could be reduced to a chimney sweep, what hope did Joy Behar have? Back on Times, The View asterisk. The escalation was reaching its peak. The hosts were flailing, trying to interrupt, trying to impose their feelings on his facts, but Ricky was systematically cutting off their oxygen. You can't second-guess people, he lectured, his voice gaining the weight of finality. If you try and please everyone, you'll please no one. The hosts exchanged uncomfortable glances. They were used to guests who desperate to please Times. Everyone asterisk. They were used to the apology. They were not used to a man who viewed their disapproval as a confirmation of his success. Sorry. That's not how it works, Ricky said, and the apology was purely sarcastic. The point of no return had been crossed. The polite veneer was gone. The audience, initially unsure of whose side to take, was beginning to sense that they were watching a blood sport. The witnesses, the camera crew, the producers in the booth could feel the shift. The producers were likely frantically signaling for a commercial break, for a change of topic, for anything to stop the bleeding. But it was too late. Ricky had the floor. The explosion didn't come with a shout. It didn't come with a table flip. It came with a simple, devastating equation. Ricky Gervais leaned forward. His body language shifted from the relaxed posture of the guest to the commanding presence of the orator. He looked directly at the hosts, who were still trying to process his dismissal of their feelings. If offense equals correctness, Ricky boomed, his voice cutting through the studio's murmurs. Then guess what? He paused. A master of timing. He let them wonder. He let them hope that perhaps he was about to concede a point. Every person who's ever lost an argument was actually the winner, he declared. It was a statement of such profound absurdity that it exposed the hollowness of their entire worldview. If being upset makes you right, then logic is dead. If tears are evidence, then truth is irrelevant. That's how participation trophies were invented, he added, twisting the knife. He was systematically dismantling the culture that The View Times thrived on. He was attacking the very machinery of modern outrage. And he wasn't done. He looked at the panel, smart women, successful women, and he saw something else. He saw a refusal to understand nuance. He saw a willful blindness to context. With comedy as well, you've got to. I think you got to deal with taboos and contentious issues, he explained, trying one last time to offer them a lifeline. to understanding. And sometimes you deal in irony. And some people don't get that, he said, his eyes scanning the faces of the hosts. They stared back, blankly. They didn't get it. They were still processing the sexist comment from 10 minutes ago. They were still trapped in the literal interpretation of his words. And then, Ricky delivered the line that would become the epitaph for the entire interview. A line so cutting, so visually evocative, that it would be shared in memes and clips for years to come. But, you can't legislate against stupidity, he sighed, the resignation in his voice palpable. Otherwise, you'll be doing nothing. If you're saying anything, you should polarize. You should polarize because everyone's different, he insisted. He gestured to the world at large, to the millions of viewers, and then brought it back to the specific frustration of the moment. Because explaining irony to some people, he said, delivering the final blow of this salvo, is like teaching a goldfish algebra. The image was instantaneous and devastating. The hosts, the critics, the outraged mob on Twitter. Goldfish, staring blankly at a blackboard full of equations, opening and closing their mouths, unable to comprehend the complexity of the lesson. They nod, they blink, and then they say something even dumber, he concluded. The studio was silent. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of a crater after the bomb has gone off. He had called them goldfish to their faces. He had called their outrage stupidity, and he had done it with a smile. While the applause sign flickered uncertainly in the background, the explosion had begun. But Ricky Gervais wasn't finished. He had dismantled their logic, but he had not yet reclaimed his crown. To do that, he would need to do more than just win the argument. He would need to steal the show, just like he stole the Emmy. The studio was reeling from the goldfish comment, but Ricky Gervais was merely reloading. He had exposed the intellectual bankruptcy of their outrage, but he still needed to address the Times motive asterisk. Why does he do it? Why does he walk into rooms filled with the most fragile egos on the planet and proceed to shatter them? The hosts, desperate to regain footing, hinted that perhaps he should tone it down. Perhaps he should play nice for the industry. It was a suggestion that revealed they still didn't understand the man sitting in front of them. They thought he was playing for Times them asterisk. They thought he was auditioning for their approval. Ricky leaned back, a look of genuine pity crossing his face. It can be a mutual backslapping. Fest. Fine, he conceded, acknowledging the way Hollywood usually works. But don't televise it. He gestured to the cameras, the red lights blinking like eyes in the darkness. Because I'm not doing it for the 200 egos in the room, he declared, his voice cutting through the pretense of celebrity camaraderie. I'm doing it for the 200 million people watching around who aren't winning awards. With one sentence, he stripped the hosts and every celebrity they worshipped of their importance. He aligned himself not with the elites in the studio, but with the people on the couch at home. The people who are tired of lectures. The people who are tired of participation trophies. He wasn't the villain of this story. He was the avatar of the audience. The hosts sat frozen. They were the 200 egos. He had just told them, to their faces, that they didn't matter. The interview was effectively over, but the execution was not. Ricky needed a closing statement, a final nail in the coffin that would ensure no one would ever try to trap him again. The hosts, defeated on logic and defeated on motive, were left with nothing but their shock. And that is when Ricky dropped the ultimate shield, the philosophy that makes him invincible. I've reached the age now where I don't care anymore, he said, smiling with the serenity of a monk who has just set the temple on fire. You know what I mean? It's like, what's the worst that can happen? He asked. He paused, letting the question hang there. Cancellation? Boycott? Angry tweets? None of it mattered. I'm going to die soon, he announced bluntly. So, I'm offended. I'm going to die. So, what? It was the ultimate mic drop. In a culture obsessed with self-preservation, reputation management, and longevity, Ricky Gervais played the death card. You cannot threaten a man who has already accepted his own mortality. You cannot shame a man who views his time on earth as a limited engagement to be spent laughing. This fearlessness wasn't an act. It was the same primal energy he had unleashed years earlier in the most legendary act of theft in Hollywood history. The narrator's mind flashes back to the ** 2008 Emmys. ** The night Steve Carell stole Ricky's award. Ricky hadn't been there to accept his Emmy for Times, Extras asterisk. So Steve Carell, the shoddy remake version of Ricky, according to Gervais, had accepted it on his behalf. A year later, at the asterisk 2009 Emmys asterisk, Ricky returned. And he didn't come to make a speech. He came to collect a debt. I couldn't come last year, but I still won, Ricky had reminded the audience, his eyes scanning the crowd for his prey. Ricky Gervais couldn't be here tonight, so instead we're going to give this to our friend Steve Carell, he mimicked, mocking the footage from the previous year. Look at his stupid face. The audience at the Emmys had laughed nervously. Was he joking? Give me my Emmy, Ricky demanded, staring down Steve Carell in the front row. Steve sat there, stone-faced, clutching the statue. But Ricky wasn't asking. I'll come down there, he threatened. Give me it. I'll tickle you. I don't care. And then, the moment that defined him. He descended from the stage. He walked into the audience. A nobody in a room of somebodies. He approached one of the biggest stars in the world. A man Hollywood treated with reverence. Give me the Emmy. Give me the Emmy, he chanted, physically wresting the award from Steve Carell's hands. Mission accomplished. He walked away with the trophy, leaving Steve Carell empty-handed and the audience stunned. He had physically taken back what was his. He had proven that polite society rules do not apply to him. Back on Times The View asterisk. That same spirit was in the room. He hadn't tickled Joy Behar, and he hadn't physically wrestled anyone. But he had stripped them of something far more valuable. Their moral authority. He sat there, the victor, having explained to them that their offense was irrelevant because death is coming for us all. Translation. 0 F asterisk KS. Given the narrator observes. Ricky gathered himself, his work done. He didn't wait for a sign-off. He didn't wait for validation. He had turned a trap into a pulpit, preached his gospel of goldfish algebra, and was now ready to leave. The hosts were left in the wreckage, speechless and humiliated, forced to cut to commercial while the ghost of his laughter still echoed in the studio. What started as a promotional interview for a comedy special became a historical document. It was the day the unstoppable force of British wit collided with the immovable object of American sensitivity, and the object moved. Ricky Gervais didn't just win an argument on Times The View asterisk. He exposed the fragility of the entire cancel culture mechanism. He proved that the trap only works if the victim is afraid. If the victim laughs, if the victim calls the trap stupid, if the victim reminds the executioner that we're all going to die soon, the trap dissolves. Was he right? Was Joy Behar right? The history books will likely side with the man who looked at the angry mob and saw a bowl of goldfish. In a world where everyone is terrified of saying the wrong thing, Ricky Gervais became a legend simply by saying whatever the hell he wanted and daring the world to stop him. They tried to ambush a comedian. Instead, they crowned a king.